My name is John Zimmerman, former secretary of the club, and have the dubious distinction of being named club historian. Although I never think of myself as a historian. At any rate, we have two additional speakers. I'll be in the middle. Standing beside me is Tony Saletti and his wife Barbara over here, and they're representing, I believe, Friends of the Lazaretto, which Tony will tell you about, and a little bit about Seaplane Bay. And then I will take it from there with a PowerPoint presentation. And Eugene Huff is here, and he represents a group called Saving Hallowed Ground, and he will talk a little bit about that. And so we'll start off with Tony, and then I'll jump in. Okay. Go ahead, Tony.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
Welcome everybody out on a really nice fall evening. Getting some feedback, sorry. I'm going to talk briefly about the 1799 Lazaretto and how it became a seaplane base. From 1801 to 1895, the Lazaretto was a quarantine station for the Port of Philadelphia. In 1895, the quarantine station moved to Marcus. A few years later, the Philadelphia Athletic Club leased the property from the city of Philadelphia, who owned the property, and called it the Orchard. And it was a summer home for the Philadelphia Athletic Club. By 1913, it was empty again. In 1915, a member of the Corinthian Yacht Club named Robert Glendenning buys a flying boat from the Curtis Company, has it delivered by rail to here, assembled here at the yacht club, and has built a floating hangar. If everybody's familiar with a floating dock to move a boat out of the water so it's not bashed. Planes are even more delicate than boats to tidal action and wave action. In the next year, he, through various means, one of them being flying his flying boat over City Hall, dropping cardboard bombs off and say, you know, if you don't let me start a school, the Germans will do this to us next year when they come. Philadelphia decides to lease him the school for $1 a year, and with the provision that he teach college-age men to fly planes, and they agree to become part of our armed forces, our Marine Corps, our Navy, and our Army, in the event that America becomes involved in World War I, which we did 1 year later in 1917. It goes from being a flying school, a private flying school, to Chandler Field. The men who learned to fly there, and Robert himself, distinguished themselves in the air war over Europe. And Robert himself then becomes quite prominent in the Army Air Corps at the time. In 1919, the war is over, and it's reopened as a civilian base for aviation, and it still is today an FAA seaplane base. So that's just a brief history of how it emerged from being a quarantine station to becoming a flying school. Chandler Field, part of the Army aviation program, and then transitioning back to a civilian school in 1919. So that's the brief overview. I don't want to bore you with any more, sometimes not interesting facts, but I want to introduce back John, who's going to give a nice presentation, a PowerPoint presentation on the 100 years of aviation and yachting on the Delaware River and what it had to do with Caribbean yacht clubs contributing to World War I. John?
Yep. Okay. Tony, you have a question?
Just one. So what's in the Lazaretto today?
We're supposed to reserve the questions to the end, but I'll answer that one question. That's okay. Lazaretto today is an empty building that's been mothballed, and we've been promised by the Tinicum Township, who owns the building, that by 2017 it will reopen as a municipal building and a museum space.
Very good. Thank you.
do is impart some information on a distant relative of mine, because my mother was at Glendenning, and I'm very honored to have a whole bunch of Glendennings that are here tonight. So look around for them, say hello. They're cousins and aunts, and I'm delighted that they're here. What I hope to accomplish is to do a little profile on Colonel Robert Glendenning that Tony spoke of, and then show you some of the member yachts and a little bit of information about that. Many of these yachts have been turned over to the war effort during World War I, some of which we have the official numbers on the yachts, in which case I've noted them. But it's very difficult to track down all the yachts by name or even by owner, because often they're given to the Navy for the war effort, they're sold for a small amount of money, and then after the war, they're bought by somebody else, and the name changes. So it's kind of a difficult assignment. But let's start with Colonel Robert. All right, this is a picture of Robert Glendenning in his later years. As you can see, he was born in 1867 and died in 1936, and was a prominent Philadelphia banker, broker, and aviator. This is a picture of him as a student at the University of Pennsylvania. He graduated the class of 1988. 1888, thank you. It'd be a lot better if I had a drink while I was doing it. He's a member of the Zeta Psi fraternity and marshal of the Republicans, Radical Republicans, and he was also on the cricket shooting tug-of-war teams at Penn, and members of the racket and canoe club. So he was an all-around guy. And as Tony said, aviation was coming into play, and Robert was a balloonist first. And there were a lot of balloon clubs in the Philadelphia region, over in Jersey, back in Manoa, very close by to here, up in the northeast section of Philadelphia and so forth. And aviation was just getting started. And Robert had ballooned all around here and also over in France. The Aero Club of America was established and incorporated in 1910. And that's a result of the molding of all these clubs together. And he was a member of that. And during that time, he developed this keen interest in. All right. Developed a keen interest in aeronautics and the theory of flight. Now, this is an aerial view that was taken in 1929, showing the Lazaretto in the center there. That's just upriver, a couple of blocks from here. And as mentioned earlier by Tony, Glendenning was a founding member of the Philadelphia School of Aviation here at the Essington Seaplane Base, next to the Lazaretto. Here's a better photograph, or an enlargement of that, with the Lazaretto here, and the Seaplane Base about here, and Corinthian Yacht Club would be over here to my left. Okay?
Oh, Trump's place Mar-a-Lago.
And this was their logo, and this is a really fuzzy thing, because right, don't you love it? A witch on a broomstick. And it was Aero Club of Philadelphia first, then later Aero Club of Pennsylvania, and then they dropped the logo and it became Aero Club of America Incorporated. So as an enthusiast, they flew these planes out of Essington. This is the Curtiss F-1 model flying boat. And Curtis is spelled right, if you notice. It has two S's on the end. And as Tony said, this was a very active base, and there was a lot of instruction in flying. These F-1s were purported to have a top speed of about 40 to 45 miles an hour once you got them airborne. So they weren't too fast. Yeah. And this school became the National Aeronautics Association's first approved flying unit in the United States because it was so active. And Glendenny, as mentioned, was an instructor here and also a member of the Corinthian Yacht Club, where we are now. Interesting note, of the 15 original flying school members, 8 were members of the Yacht Club.
That's interesting. That's cool.
And here, this is a little bio on his military service. Shown here, these guys were troopers, and we have some troopers here tonight. This is a troop flag, which Eugene will tell you about. So right out of Penn in 1889, he joined the 1st City Troop and Cavalry Unit. And of course, we were going into the Spanish-American War, and he served in that in 1989. And let me see, I think I have a note here. Yeah, that lasted a few years, and the Treaty of Paris resolved it. And it took place in Cuba. And the USS Maine was sunk mysteriously in Havana Harbor, and she was part of the Great White Fleet, similar to the Olympia, which is down on Penn's Landing. And it also took place out in the Philippines and the Marshall Islands. So it was a pretty broad war with the Spanish. And that kind of got us Guantanamo Bay, we know what that is. And I believe our Air Force base are in Manila. This is a picture of Colonel Robert. Oh, looks like I got a stray number down there. Well, it's World War I, bounced onto the wrong line. But this is him as commander. Because of his knowledge of flying and the fact that he spent so much time over in the European theater, both in France, Italy, around airplanes, which were really developing rather rapidly, he became an expert on munitions, maintenance, war prepping, and so forth with gunnery and whatnot. So they made him commander of the American Army and National Air Forces during World War I. Oops, let's try that. There we go. Okay. At the end of the war, he was awarded the Distinguished Service Medal by the U.S. government for his many contributions to the American wartime aviation. And after the war, he ended his military career as a full colonel and returned to pursuing a career in the Philadelphia brokerage business. And here he is as a banker, broker, on the left, and this was the Glendenny and Company offices at 303 Chestnuts, 302, I guess, 3 Chestnut Street. So he was very successful. And interestingly enough, he was elected governor of the New York Stock Exchange, and he was the first governor ever elected outside the state of New York. So that's pretty special. He was also members of the Philadelphia Curb Exchange that preceded the Amex, Philadelphia Stock Exchange, and Pittsburgh. Oop. It goes fast when you hold it down. He was a civic leader, and he was a member of the Fairmont Park Commission, founder of the Chestnut Hill Hospital and the Pennsylvania School for the Deaf. It started out with being called the Philadelphia School for the Deaf, but later Pennsylvania School. And he was finance chair of the state committee. You probably all recognize this tunnel on the East River Drive, now the Kelly Drive, and this is the Glendenning Rock Garden, which was donated by the family in his memory and is still managed by Glendenning for its care. He's a handsome guy, always very smartly dressed. And here he is, relaxing at home on the terrace of his villa in Palm Beach's famous Worth Avenue. And here is a picture of the villa, Castle di Leone, in the background. And that's Robert Jr. And his wife out boating on the Lake Worth. If you can call that boating. Right. All right, so now I'd like to take you through some Corinthian Yacht Club information. As you can see, it was incorporated in 1892. And kind of interesting, I'm going to go to the next slide. This is what it looked like in 1892. This is part of it. And you see this, what almost looks like a lighthouse up here. But this is acquired in 1891 from the Tinicum Fishing Club. That's what it was called. And it had been, the membership had died, and it had been fallow down here for probably about 10 or 12 years, I believe, maybe longer. And so they negotiated a price, and they bought the club for, you ready, $7,500 with 27 acres of property. Okay, most of the property's been sold off. And it's interesting, I mean, in today's numbers, with inflation, $7,500 translates into about $197,400. Still a bargain. This is what it looked like from the Delaware River. Clubhead's hard to see because behind the trees here, but these are all the boat sheds. And the basin area is right in here. And this is probably about a little after 1892, because this flagpole here is the flagpole of an America's Cup defender that was on its way to the scrapyard and got rescued. We turned it in to our flagpole. And here's a picture of the basin. You see how close it is to the back steps. This area is still there. It's all silted in, however. But in those days, you could get a pretty large draft boat involved.
It's gotta be 60 or 70 feet, that boat.
So, now we'll talk about some of the members and their yachts, and I'll take you through that pretty quickly. This is the steam yacht Alcida. George W. Childs Drexel was the owner, and she was the first civilian-donated yacht to be torpedoed. It was torpedoed on November 5th, 1917. There's another photograph of Alcida taken in Yokohama Harbor, and she's been noted as USS Alcida SP-166. This photograph does not show any of her armaments, because from Yokohama she came east and ended up in the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And there she was going to be outfitted with 6 3-inch guns. So they put in 6 platforms to hold the guns, but when it came time, because the guns were scarce, they only ended up with 4. So, and they also put in the stern a rack for depth charges. This we know from the director Drexel University archives, which I've researched, and some information from a nephew of George Chubbs, Drexel. So this is the relative was A.J. Drexel Paul. He was a first lieutenant, U.S. Naval Reserve. He was on Alcedo at this time. There were over 100 on board, 95 midshipmen, some civilians like surgeons, etc. 21 people lost their lives. And I thought this quote by the captain of Alcedo, William T. Kahn, was worth putting in. The Alcedo was sunk as near as I can estimate 75 miles west true of north end of Belle Isle. The torpedoes struck ship at 1:46 by the officer of the deck's watch, and the same watch stopped at 1:54 a.m. November 5th, this showing that the ship remained afloat for only 8 minutes. This is the missing clock. This was aboard Alcedo. It was a large clock about this wide, and usually is right here, and it's been here at the club for many years, and it's always kept perfect time, and until about 2 months or 3 months ago, it just stopped. So it's out for repairs. But Drexel took it off the yacht, obviously, when it was being outfitted for service, because he thought a lot of it. Now, this is Alexander Van Rensselaer. He was a financial dude also. And this was his yacht, the May. And it's interesting, we know we have no service record on her or number, but in the accounting by Paul Drexel, he mentions that while Alcedo was in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, right next door was this yacht being outfitted for war. So I just don't have the number on it. Yeah, now this is, remember Edgar Scott, this is Sagamore, all dressed up, for a party, I guess, in the early days before she turned over, but she definitely did war service. These are all steam yachts, schooner rig for the most part. This one is a topsail schooner. Scott was a banker also. It was the company he started was Janney Montgomery Scott is where it moved to eventually. Now this is John R. Drexel. This is another Drexel, and this is Sultana, and she did service, SP 144. These are all big yachts.
Yeah.
This one was 187 feet, 6 inches. Alexander Thayer, cousin of mine, I believe. Queen Anne, 186. Don't have any history on her. And Alondra, this is Addie Kent's yacht renamed Fidus II. But this is what she looked like when he was a member. And if you know anything about Addie Kent, I mean, he was an experimenter, an inventor, and was very deeply involved in radio. Radio was just something. And he made his fortune on selling radios. This is Alert, T. DeWitt Seiler, and she's SP 511 and 75 feet. This yacht was likely a launch to one of these larger steam yachts. And so she might have hung on davits alongside some of the larger yachts. Now, you can't mistake this one. This is a warship. But she's only 120 feet. This is J. Livingston Sullivan, and as you see at the bottom, it says awarded the chevron of service in the war, most likely the Second World War, as a guess. Another one, Margot, SP 870, George McNeely's boat. And here's the real guy, Anthony J. Drexel, and his yacht, Margarita. This is the man who started the Drexel empire and brokerage firm, later Drexel, Burnham, Lambert, and on ad infinitum. This yacht was 278 feet 6 inches. And you see, he was a member here twice, from 1892 to 1910, and then back again in 28 until he died in 1934. And this is Satilla and Justice C. Strawbridge. I think you all know who this gent is, right? This was his yacht. No SP number that I've been able to find yet, but he was the founder of the dry goods store, Strawbridge and Clothier, which later became a chain. And here we have Sachem, Roland L. Taylor. So you see, I mean, this was a moneyed group. And I'm just going, I'm going to hold it there. The genesis of this club is that a whole bunch of members from the Quaker City Yacht Club had merged with another yacht club previous, the Philadelphia Yacht Club, so now they were all together. The Philadelphia Yacht Club crowd, those were the wool guys, and the Quaker City Yacht Club were probably considered, the other. So after the two of them had merged together, there was a lot of tension among the membership. And they established, the Quaker City guys established a downriver committee to look for a new location, because they were all operating out of taverns and or hotels in the waterfront area of downtown Philadelphia. So it was the Downriver Committee. Once they found this place from the Tinicum Yacht Club, they said, "That's it, we're out of here." And they were mostly all former Philadelphia Yacht Club people. And then they said, "We need a name," and they looked to the Sewanaka Corinthian up in Long Island Sound. They said they liked the sound of that, so let's call it the Corinthian Yacht Club, and that's what they did. And the following year, 1892, they incorporated down here. So, sorry for the little aside, but that's kind of the end of my side of the talk. If you want to see some of these yachts and hear a little bit about Colonel Robert Glendenning, and I hope it's been somewhat instructive. I'd like to now introduce Eugene Huff. He's here somewhere. There you are, Eugene. Eugene represents the group called Saving Hollow Ground. He'd like to tell you a little bit about it. Sure.
Thank you. Every event has a story behind it, and I think it's important to give a little bit of background information. Most importantly, that Tony and Barbara Saletti have been extremely active in advocating for the Chandler Field Sea-Based Plane Site and the Lazaretto for years. I'm very slow on the computer, but through some various communications, recognizing the National World War I centennial that is unfolding and will be culminating in 2019, Tony had said, look, we need to try to organize together. Let's collaborate and see how we can address some of the issues at hand. At that time, 3 years ago, I didn't even know about the Lazaretto. I didn't know about the Chandler Sea-Based Plane Site. I'd only been to the Corinthian Yacht Club twice. And so the story unfolded where the meeting took place with Tony and Barbara. Barbara, you should know, is a genealogist and a librarian, head librarian at Newman University, and works very closely with Tony on many efforts dealing with history and preservation. The concern today is the stories, and as John has offered this evening, the story about the Glendenning family, the history there, and this club, but also the relationship with World War I, very important pieces that we want to bring forward. Saving Hallowed Ground was established after 15 years where I've been dealing with cemetery and monument conservation up and down the East Coast. In fact, down in Augusta, Georgia, working in a colonial cemetery, somebody asked about the rosette I was wearing, and I mentioned that it was a First City Troop rosette. And I began to explain a little bit about the troop, and then I looked across in the field there, and standing there was a gentleman, Mr. Hart, wearing a First City Troop flag, and he's sitting in the back of the audience today. So you never know who you're going to meet in a cemetery, but I haven't seen my good friend for many, many years, Mr. John Devereaux, who was and still an external historian regarding the First City Troop. And this is our troop flag here, the Marco Standard, which the troop goes back to 1774. And if you come up and take a look at it, it's an alternating field of stripes, 13 stripes at the top of the flag. In the corner, an angel, a horse, and an indigenous individual on the right. Again, Mr. Glendenning, and you think in terms of his role as a business person and being a First City Trooper, it requires so much dedication to be involved in that organization. But through that, we've made great friendships, and it's basically a stewardship for history, and I've been very proud to be a part of that. One of the things I want to do tonight, before I forget, is I want to award a coin to Beth here from the Glendenning family. This is a Saving Hallowed Ground coin, and I'm going to jump back just briefly to give our mission statement. After coming back to Philadelphia to speak before American Legion Post, after the meeting, several unit commanders got together and they said, Gene, you can't save every cemetery. The stories and the monuments need to be preserved. Let's try to form an organization, and thus we filed for a domain name under the title Saving Hallowed Ground, which is dedicated to the preservation and protection of monuments and markers dedicated to veterans and patriots wherever they may be found. So that's not only in Philadelphia, it's across the United States and overseas. It's not just about veterans, it's the people and the times. And when I go out and speak to Rotarian groups and other groups, and Tony and Barbara will attest to this, there is an underlying frustration in this country among parents and teachers about the general direction of this country, where we are losing the stories about the people and the times. So what can we do? Saving Hallowed Ground addresses this by education, preservation, stewardship. Our program embodies the process of students in groups of threes, going to monuments, research, selecting names, researching those names, conducting hands-on conservation on those monuments themselves, and then performing an open-air presentation in their communities to tell the stories about the peoples and the times. I don't know the yachting industry, but this evening, as part of this story, and also with the Lazzarato and the Sea Lakes playing site, is how can we take professionals in this room to act as mentors to help these students when they're doing this research? Not only are they representing the stories of their communities, but then they have the opportunity to share their stories with students in Ohio, across the country, and overseas. These coins embody what we do as a reward to the students. On the back, the powerful words of education, stewardship, preservation, education, stewardship, embody a space where a QR code could be put. So in fact, when we are studying, the students are researching the stories that John has shared this evening, their information could be uploaded to the Corinthian Web Club, the Corinthian Club's website to highlight the information you have. So those students have access to professionals and archives that can help them with their research. We feel very powerfully about what is happening over the next several years for the World War I centennial, because out near the reception desk, there's a map that came out of the New York Times book. And you look at that and you ask students, well, how many countries were involved? And they said maybe 3 or 4. If you look at that map, it's approximately 35 faces that represent individuals around the world. What was going on in the yachting industry overseas? What was going on in the aviation industry overseas? What was the role of medicine? What was the art? What was the music? What was the poetry? Again, we embody the stories and the curriculums that are in our schools and allow them to tell the stories. But we need contacts. And most importantly, we're asking everyone in the room tonight, we hope you'll keep in touch with us, because the idea is in the next several years leading up to 2019 to possibly do some hands-on clinics on boats with students so they can learn about this. I know there's Philadelphia Sail and other entities, but let's get Corinthia involved so they can engage students. It obviously probably might increase membership because people don't know about this wonderful site. But most importantly, we have a great opportunity to utilize the resources and passions of people in this room. Keep the stories alive. Saving Hollow Ground wants to work with you. This coin I want to award to the Glendenning family. I know many of them in the room. I lived in Chestnut Hill. Fabulous family, obviously family dedicated to many of the causes that we're voting tonight. Thank you very much.